Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Therapy on Tap. Thanks again for joining in. So, in today's episode, I want to discuss why it is so important that we do not externalize our stress. Now, what do I mean by externalizing our stress? I mean the very human tendency to blame our stress on the thing that we think is causing our stress. So, this could be anything. This could be work. This could be a person in a relationship. This could be your boss. This could be a specific phobia, like let's say dogs or something. We have a very common tendency as human beings. We want to blame other things, other people on our stress. So the way we think about a lot of our stressors is we think this thing is causing me stress. My boss is causing me stress because they're so difficult. My partner is causing me stress because they do XYZ. My neighbor is causing me stress because of XYZ. I'm stressed out because so-and-so showed up late. Whatever it is, it could be a person, it could be a thing. We all like to do this. And I understand why we do this. Sometimes we're not even always wrong, right? Sometimes we have valid reasons. Sometimes we're dealing with people who are difficult. We're dealing with situations that are difficult. Okay, you lose a job. Things can no doubt be inherently stressful. But the problem is when you start blaming other things for your stress, you are putting all your power into the outside world. You are taking away all of your control over yourself, over your life, over your world. And the other reality with this is that stressors, what we find stressful is completely subjective. Okay. Now, there are things obviously that we would probably all agree are objectively stressful, but for the most part, most things are subjective. What one person might find annoying in a person, another person might really enjoy that characteristic in another person. One person might be terrified of dogs, for example. Another person finds great peace in being around dogs. Some people are terrified of getting on planes. Other people find planes really calming. No matter how you slice it, whatever thing in your life right now that is stressing you, it is either completely subjective or it is in your control within your perception. You may not realize this, but it is in your control within your perception. That's why you can have two coworkers at work. One person seems stressed out every day, and the other person seems cool as a cucumber. What's going on? If they have the same boss, if they're in the same environment, and one person's really relaxed and the other person's really stressed, well, it can't just be the culture. Now, of course, there are times where certain things are just bad, obviously. I'm not saying that there aren't things that are objectively bad that we would all agree, man, that would be really stressful. That would be really toxic environment to be in. That would be a really unhealthy relationship to have, right? There certainly are objective things. But at the end of the day, we get to decide not only what bothers us, but how much it bothers us and how often it bothers us. So at the end of the day, whatever problem it is that's in your life, you do have more control of it than you think. Let's say you have a really difficult boss, for example, and they're on your ass every single day. Well, you could look at that problem and say, man, I can't stand my boss. They won't leave me alone. They're constantly micromanaging me. They're constantly on top of me. And you can get really frustrated and flustered every single day if you want to. If you choose to do that, you can do that. Or you can say, you know what? This is who this person is. I can't change how they act. So I can either choose to continue to take this personally, or I can start to create some boundaries within our relationship so that they can't constantly take advantage of me. Now, obviously, there are risks to that. I understand that not every solution exists in a vacuum, right? If you start to speak up more to your boss, well, there's a risk that they could retaliate or they could fire you or something like that. And that is all true. And that's really unfair. But again, at the end of the day, you have a choice of what you want to do with your life. Are you willing to take the risk to ruffle some feathers, to potentially have a bad outcome so that you can gain a little more power and freedom in your life? Okay, so I want to make clear, I'm not saying you should blame yourself for all your problems. That isn't the point here. Obviously, all of our problems are a combination of us and other people. But the only thing we have any control over is what we do. And so when you start blaming other people or you start blaming other things for your problems, you are literally putting yourself in a helpless position. You are putting yourself in a weak position. You are saying, there is nothing I can do. Oh, well, I guess I'm screwed. And because you can't take the first step of awareness to even acknowledge that you have a role in any problem in your life, you can't actually even do anything about it. Well, what can I do? If I say to myself, every stressor in my life, I'm stressed out in the house because there's so many tasks to do, and I'm stressed out because I got to do this thing and I have to run this chore and all this. If I blame all the other things, well, what's going to change? If I blame all the people in my life for the stress they cause me, what's going to change? How does blaming other people, how does blaming other things help you? You can't even begin to address the problem. This is the biggest problem with externalizing stress, is you can't even begin to address the problem because in your mind, there isn't a problem to solve because the problem is not your own. It's everybody else's. So you blame other people, or you blame other things. And again, this is a human thing. I'm not criticizing. I'm not saying that you're bad for doing this. We all do this. And sure, there are situations that really are just so bad, there's nothing we can really do about it. And it really is out of our control. And that's fair to say. But this is more of a mindset problem. If you look at life as a constant barrage of external hurdles that are unfair and unjust, this sort of mindset that the world is unfair, yeah, sometimes the world can be very unfair, but you're going to make no progress in your life like that because you're not even seeing it as a problem to solve. So that's why you feel helpless. And in fact, that's why you feel more stressed out, because you don't feel like there's anything you can do about it. If I have social anxiety, for example, and I say to myself, well, of course I have social anxiety, people are really judgmental and people are really mean. That could be true. Like, yes, especially when we're younger, people are really judgmental and people are really mean. And that is partly true. But if I say that, well, now what motivation do I have to do anything about it? I've already labeled everybody as mean and judgmental. So I'm out of the game. I'm checking out. I'm not interested in socializing anymore because everybody else is mean. Okay, again, you can do this with day stress, the workload at your job, feeling stressed because you're running late to work or you're running late to an event. At the end of the day, all of these things, while they're not always 100% in your control, they are 100% of your responsibility, because who else's responsibility could they be? You're not a puppeteer. You can't make people do things. You can't go out in the world and make traffic less traffic. Okay, if you're going out in traffic and you're getting angry every day because there's traffic, well, I'm sorry, but you're the reason why you're angry. Okay, traffic has existed since the beginning of cars. So if you're getting angry at the traffic, that's your problem. You have to look inward and realize, okay, well, I'm going out into a car at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, which means there's going to be a lot of people driving. So if I choose to do that, that's my problem to deal with. I don't get to blame other people. And yes, there are jerks on the road who cut you off and do all sorts of things and run red lights and all this sort of stuff. That's all true. But you can't do anything about that. You can't stop people from doing that. And you already know that that's going to happen. Every time you go out to drive, there's going to be people who cut you off. So if you get angry at every person who cuts you off, well, that's kind of foolish. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and thinking there's going to be a different result, right? So at some point, you have to accept that life isn't always going to work out exactly the way you want to work out, okay? But there is such a freeing power in being able to own even the 1% of control you have over a situation. And it really is the only way out of the problem. And it's really the only way to gain any kind of power back in your life. Now, why do we do this, right? I mean, we all do this. We all do this sometimes in our life. Why do we do this? One, because I think it's true to a degree. A lot of our complaints about life are often true. They're not untrue. Again, the world is unjust. The world is unfair. Things aren't working the way we think they should work. And sometimes we have a valid argument. So, sometimes it's just a matter of fact that things don't need to be as stressful as they are, but they are. And that's hard to just accept because, especially when it comes to people, because we have this sense of justice, we have this sense of fairness, and we feel like the world should work in a certain way, and it's not working in a certain way. So that's understandable, okay? But that isn't going to change anything unless you're going to be on the front lines of making significant change in the world. And even then, there's only so much you can really do about what the people around you are doing. So at some point, you have to accept that things are not the way you want them to be. Okay. The other reason why we tend to do this is because it's easier. It's psychologically easier, right? It's painful to take accountability for the stress in your life, because that means you have to admit that you're doing something wrong, or it means that you have to say to yourself, well, I have to do something that's going to be really difficult for me to do. Okay. If I'm afraid of socializing, like I brought up before, I have to admit, to my own shame and embarrassment around socializing and why it's so hard for me to do this. And that can be really difficult to do. And it's understandable why you want to push that feeling away. You don't want that negative feeling of guilt and shame and embarrassment about why it's so hard for you to socialize. There are psychological benefits, it seems, in the moment to blaming other things and other people, right? If I blame my relationship for my problems, well, that takes the onus off me. I don't have to feel bad anymore. And if I tell other people I can get their approval, and that feels good, right? I tell someone about some issue I'm having in my relationship, and they confirm that I'm in the right. Well, now I feel good. And so now it feels like, yeah, see, it's not me, it's them. Okay, yeah, maybe it is. So what are you going to do about it? At some point, even when there is a psychological benefit or even sometimes a practical benefit, at some point, the rubber's going to meet the road and you're going to have to make a decision to either own your role in it, however small it is, or to continue to blame the world. You know, people throw the term victim mentality out there. I don't love the term. I do think it comes across a bit insulting, but the idea around it, I think, is accurate. That when you have this mentality about the world, that the world is unjust and the world is unfair and things aren't working the way that you want them to work, you are putting yourself again in a weak position. You are putting yourself in a helpless position. And you are also, in a weird way, almost pedestaling yourself above other people because everybody else has to deal with the same problems. Now, sure, you may have had a very traumatic life, and I'm not taking that away from you, and that is a different problem in itself. But even in those cases, I think when you've experienced tremendous trauma, I mean, it's good to recognize when you're not the problem, obviously, because sometimes we are too hard on ourselves and we torture ourselves and beat ourselves up. It's important to notice when we're not the problem, obviously. However, let's say you have a habit because of some troubled past of getting into troubled relationships. Well, it's not your fault that you get into troubled relationships, but if it becomes a pattern where you continue to fall into the same kinds of the same sorts of relationships, at some point you have to own the fact that whatever's happened to you has created a situation where you are pulled to be in other unhealthy relationships. That's not your fault, but if you want to stop being in unhealthy relationships, you have to take responsibility and say, okay, what's going on here? What am I doing that's leading me to be in these unhealthy relationships? Because you can't go around to everyone in the world and say, hey, treat me better. Be nicer to me. It would be great if you could. I mean, ideally, that would be wonderful, but you can't bank on that. You don't know what other people are going to do. You can't control what other people are going to do. And some people just don't have empathy. They don't care, right? And so if you could try to control other people, you're not going to be able to do it. And then you're going to start picking up manipulation tactics in the same way that they did. And you're going to try to control people, control the narrative so that you can feel safer, so you can feel more in power and feel more in control. But that's only going to damage your relationships even more. Your best route is to take ownership and say, okay, I'm in a bad situation. I've been in a bunch of bad situations. How do I stop myself from doing that again? And again, you can do this with any sort of stressor. So while it's very tempting, and again, sometimes we have good arguments for why we feel the way we do and why we feel the world is unfair. And the world is very unfair. I mean, some people are born into abject poverty, and some people are born literally the son of a billionaire. That's not fair, and maybe there are some arguments to make that the unfairness in the world needs to be leveled out. Okay, but until we get there, what are you going to do? At some point, you have to own your role in everything in your life. It's not always easy. It can be painful. There's guilt, there's shame, but you have to be able to sit with those emotions, because part of the reason you're finding it so easy to blame others is because those emotions are so uncomfortable for you, you don't even allow yourself to sit with them. You push them away and you blame the other person, or you blame the thing, you blame the stressor, right? It's the dog's fault I'm anxious. No. Now, you may have had a bad experience with the dog before, and that's totally fair, but you don't treat the dog differently because you're afraid. You need to learn how to manage your anxiety. And I think the reality is, if we all took this approach, now maybe I'm being a little idealistic here, but if we all took this approach, that would make the world a much better place. If everybody took accountability for their role in anything that they did, we would never blame each other. We would never be arguing with each other. We would own everything that we do. Now, that's idealistic too, but we have to start somewhere. So if you're finding that you continue to fall into struggles with anxiety, with depression in your relationships, the first thing I would ask you to ask yourself is, how do I view the world? How do I view my problems? Do I see my problems as a result of the unfairness of the world? Or do I see my problems as a cause of something I'm doing or not doing? And I promise you, the second answer will bring you much more freedom, much more power, and lead you to a much less stressful life. Thanks again for listening in. Please share with your friends, and I'll see you soon.